Choosing a resin can be a relatively difficult thing. Do you want to go for ultra flexible? Do you want to have this absolute crazy crisp detail? Or do you want something that's going to be easy to clean up? Now, I'm a massive fan of Elegoo ABS Light Resin. I feel it gives me a really good mix of detail and it also gives me some great flexibility. But a number of you have asked me to look into the Elegoo Water Washable Resin or anything similar to that. And in this video, I'm going to do just that. So for anybody who's curious about this, the benefits of water washable resin are basically that, in the fact that you don't need to use IPA, you don't need to use alcohol, you don't need to use harmful chemicals to clean up your prints after they've been printed. You could basically dip them into some water, give them a good scrub, and you should be good to go. But we'll be putting that to the test today to see whether or not we lose any detail, what the flexibility is like, and I guess what that cleanup process is like. It definitely feels appealing because I've got to say, one of the biggest, smelliest things when it comes to 3D printing isn't the resin itself, it's absolutely that cleanup process afterwards. I use the Elegoo Mercury Wash and Cure Station. It's got a whole load of alcohol in there just to clean it up, and afterwards it just makes everything stink. I've got to completely ventilate the room and just kind of get it back to a workable state. It's not nice to use and I would definitely prefer to use water, so this was pretty appealing. However, it is meant to come with some trade-offs like flexibility, so it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. The things that I chose to print off for this, I went for some terrain, so this kind of big beastie bit here, and I figured it'd be interesting to see how this turns out just because it's relatively thick. There's been reports online and reviews that the thicker items tend to break and they start to sort of like, I don't know, crack and show wear and tear and everything. I also printed off this Winged Lion by Artisan Guild, and I've got to say this came out really well. And then I decided to print off some of the smaller, I guess more fiddly things by Highlands Miniatures. And I thought these would be a really good test, because the thing with the Highlands Miniatures models is they're really small and detailed, but they can be quite fiddly because they've got smaller, I guess, more realistic type weapons rather than the big chonky things that I get from Artisan Guild. I also printed off a few thin staffs as well, so that way we can do a bend test and see how these turn out. So let's start off with this building. And like I said, I was reading a lot of reviews and the negative ones say that it cracks after like a couple of weeks or so. So I figured I would do all the printing, I would leave all of these models for a good 2 weeks just to see whether or not they cracked. I'd get them painted up as well just to see how well they took the paint and all of that. And I'm happy to say I've had none of that cracking. So literally nothing is broken on these, had no cracking with it, and the details come out really well. This model here came out really well. I had no failed prints on it, and I kind of expected I might just because it is a heavier piece, it's not hollowed out, it is just all resin, so it's a relatively weighty little beastie, but actually it came out really nicely, took paint nicely, I had no issues at all with priming it and painting it up, and I've had no cracks appearing on this, so far, so good. Obviously it's harder to tell any sort of detail and everything when it's on something like terrain, so we'll move quickly across onto this Winged Lion. Now this was a really stupid one to do because I really wanted to paint this up, and I actually spent a lot more time painting this than I do any of my other models, which was crazy because obviously if it does crack, then I would have found out the very hard way after it had all been painting up, it would have then cracked later on. Fortunately, I've had no cracks, thankfully, because otherwise I would have been absolutely gutted. Now the detail on this is superb in my opinion. It's printed off at 0.05mm layer height, and I can't see any issues. I cannot distinguish any difference between this print and my prints with the Elegoo ABS Light Resin. So when it comes to detail on the water washable resin, it's really high end. There's no issues there at all. Again, I had no issues with shrinkage as well. So this model comes off in multiple parts. You've got to put the wings on and the head on. And again, there was absolutely no issue there. I didn't have any shrinkage issues. It all fit together very nicely. I didn't have any gaps. So all in all, really pleased with how this one turned out. So detail wise, shrinkage and all of that jazz, no issues there. Again, getting it primed up and painted, it all took paint very nicely. I've seen no cracks show up, so far, so good. Moving across onto the Highlands Miniature stuff, which is obviously a little bit smaller and more fiddly. They've got these kind of smaller weapons here, and the detail, again, looks fantastic. There's no difference that I can see between this and the ABS-like resin, and again, it's hard to see that at the end of the day. There might be some minute differences there, but nothing that I can see at all. These look really good. I had no fails printing these off, so far these are doing well. Moving on to the durability test, because I haven't done that yet. Obviously, I've been able to see the detail, which I think looks great, been able to use them, the durability and everything in terms of them not cracking has been good for me, and I've had no failed prints. Let's see how flexible they are. Now, with ABS-like resin, I've had some really good results. I've not been able to fold them in half like I was able to with the Conjure resin that was sent over to me by Chitu Systems, but the ABS-like resin has been really, really good. Now obviously, one thing that I've always wanted is flexibility. If you're printing miniatures, you want something that you could maybe drop, bend a little bit, that gets knocked about on the table and doesn't break. So let's see how far we can flex this. Now you might not be able to see it on camera because it's probably focus on my face, but I mean, you can kind of wiggle it around, which is good. Oh, okay, so it doesn't bend that far. That snaps relatively quick. I'm going to try and get a little bit closer for you. I don't think that's making any difference, but here we go. Ooh. So I've almost got it to like a U. Okay, so it's not too bad. And then it snaps. It's not the worst, but it's definitely not like... Oh God, that just broke. Okay, so yeah, it's not the worst. I've used the standard Elegoo resin, and when I first started off with that, I found that quite brittle and it snapped very easily. It's nowhere near as good as ABS-like resin. It's nowhere near as good as the Conjure resin. So bear that in mind. So durability is a big loss there. They get to a stage where they don't really flex. Yeah, they just snap relatively easy. So, oh, it's in my... I was about to say it's in my hair. I don't have any. Yeah, so normally they kind of flex a little bit with things like the ABS-like resin. It pushes to a certain point, and then it'll bend a little bit, and you can tell it's about to snap. With this, it kind of, yeah, it breaks pretty easy. It's really brittle, so just bear that in mind. If you are printing miniatures, might not be the one to go for. If you're printing some of the chunkier ones, like these Artisan Guild ones, then they're not too bad because they tend to have much bigger parts. It's less likely they're going to snap or flex or anything like that. But if it comes to things like these Highland Miniatures ones, or anything that has smaller details, kind of weapons, spears, just bear that in mind. So durability aside, what were the other big wins when it comes to the water washable resin? And the first one is it's water washable. The idea that I could get rid of the alcohol from my wash tank, yeah, I love that. It just makes it so much easier. Kind of wiping up the slap mat and just getting water. That to me is very appealing. And I've got to say, cleaning these with water, it did as it advertised. It was water washable. Everything came off very nicely. I replaced the alcohol that was in my tank and put water in there instead. And yeah, they did pretty much exactly the same job as I would expect when it comes to alcohol. I put it in there for longer, so I normally put them in for about 5 or 6 minutes. I put them in for an additional couple of minutes in there just to make sure I got them extra clean. But yeah, they came off very, very nicely. Now, just because it's water washable doesn't mean that you could take that water and dump it down the sink. So do bear that in mind. You're still going to have to go through the cleanup of that and make sure you cure it and dispose of it all correctly, because otherwise you're going to have issues with the environment. And you're also going to get kind of like cured and messy resin down your sink, and you don't really want that in your plumbing, do you? So aside from the water washable side of it, it didn't smell either. I didn't find any odors or anything like that. It has that normal, I guess, slight resin smell. You can definitely tell that you've been printing, but it certainly wasn't any worse than the ABS-like resin I've been using or any other resin I've been using in the past. It's very unnoticeable and didn't really kind of smell. And the great thing is there's no alcohol afterwards in terms of the cleanup, so you don't add to the smell in that respect. Price-wise, it comes in about the same cost as pretty much all the other resins in terms of like Elegoo ABS-like resin or your standard resins, so you're not going to be breaking the bank with this one. So obviously it's down to what you're going to be using. So to sum up, would I recommend the Elegoo ABS-like resin, or I guess anything that's similar to it? And I guess it really depends on what you're printing. If you are printing things like your terrain and stuff like that, then it might be worthwhile going for, because you can literally print off some larger models, stuff that's not going to be brittle, it's not going to snap, it doesn't really matter too much about the durability, and then you can dunk it in a tank of water and really give it a good clean without having to use loads of alcohol, getting loads of excess resin off this. Again, coming back to terrain, if you're hollowing it out and you're dunking it in water, at least then you're not kind of getting loads of resin into your alcohol when it's kind of coming out of there. So that might be something to consider. If you're going for models, again, that are a little bit larger, like this winged lion, then it could be something worthwhile looking at as well. And it depends if you're going to be going down to the miniature scale. Once you start getting into the smaller units, like your regiments, all of your armies, stuff that's going to be getting knocked about, played on the table quite a lot, then I would absolutely say avoid it if you can. If you really, really, really must avoid using alcohol or any harsh chemicals to do the cleaning, then yeah, maybe it's worthwhile going for. But seeing that in the durability test, how readily they snapped, I don't think it's going to be worthwhile. You're going to end up with a lot of broken models. And ultimately, once you've got your paint on there, that's just a lot of heartbreak that you're opening yourself up for. So I hope that video has helped you. Let me know in the comments if you've been using this kind of resin before. Do you normally go to water washable resins, or what's your go-to resin? Like I said, mine is still Elegoo ABS Light resin. It's my favorite one. I absolutely love it, and I'm constantly buying a new supply of it. And for miniatures and pretty much everything else, it's my go-to resin. The ABS Light resin was nice. It got some really fantastic details. I'm relatively impressed with it as well, and being able to clean it up without alcohol, that's an absolute godsend. But due to the lack of durability, I'm going to give it a pass in this one. So stay safe, hit that like and subscribe button, come along for some more 3D printing content, and I'll see you soon. Bye.